621 days ago. It was January 24th, 2023. I was in Phoenix, Arizona for a conference with a bunch of church planters. And it was there that I had my very first conversation about what I'm going to share with you next week. 621 days ago. Earlier this summer, as we started putting together the pieces of our fall, we knew that we had some series that we wanted to get to. We knew that we wanted to walk through the mental health series, and that was going to be somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks. We knew that the election was coming up, and so we knew we wanted to have a targeted series of talks around what it looks like to be a Jesus follower in the midst of everything that's going on in our country right now. And so we knew we'd put that on the schedule. We also knew that every single year that we've been a church, we stop for a moment in October, typically the first Sunday of October, which is today, and we have something that we refer to as Vision Sunday. Now, when we started to take a look at it, we also realized that what we wanted to unveil to you next week that we've been working on for the last 621 days is a little too much to put into one Sunday. And so we've broken it up into part 1 and part 2. Now, we haven't told anyone that we were doing part 1 today. We've just told everybody that Vision Sunday is next week. So we get to figure out who are the real followers of Jesus that came to church today. You know? The ones that weren't real, they went to the beach because they have a long weekend, you know? I'm kidding. Kind of. I'm sure they're watching online. Toes in the sand. Now, we wanted to do a couple things different today. First, you probably noticed, for those of you who are here with us week in and week out, that we did an extra song this morning. And we went back and forth a little bit, Christian and I did, about whether or not y'all were conditioned like Pavlov's dog, like the bell rings and you salivate, if after the second song that all of you would be like, oh, that's it, we're done. Now Clint's gonna walk from over there and it's over here. And so we went back and forth on whether we should tell you, hey, we're gonna do an extra song today or not. And I was like, I think they're just gonna stay, I think they'll stay engaged, you know, until something else happens. And you passed the test, good job. That was good. That was good. However, we also made an intentional decision to choose very carefully the songs that were chosen this morning because we wanted a little bit of today for there to be a different voice other than mine to share this Vision Sunday. You might have already forgotten the first 3 songs because they just kind of leave our minds as they go, but every word mattered. And in fact, I'm not going to talk as long today because we're going to sing a little bit more. Because there are more songs that are going to communicate what our message is today. This is Vision Sunday Part 1. Vision Sunday is the Sunday gathering each year where we lay out what's next for Foundation. Over the years in Vision Sundays, we've released things like our role in mentoring at-risk kids in the Coweta County public school system. We had no idea 5 or 6 years ago when we laid that out on one of those first Vision Sundays that, hey, this is where we're headed. That we've been given this opportunity to invest in kids that are at risk in our school system. We had no idea that it would start at Ruth Hill Elementary School and that we would have mentors that started there just thinking through like, hey, it's a year commitment, all right? So it's a 1 school year commitment to have lunch with them once a week. And we had no idea that it was gonna go from those mentors meeting with those kids for lunch each week, and it was going to start at Ruth Hill, and then those kids were going to go to 6th grade to Smoky Road Middle School, and those mentors would follow those kids to Smoky Road. We never thought that. And then we had no idea that you fast forward a little bit more, that those kids then went to Noonan High School, and that those mentors now go and mentor them at Noonan High School. That we've had mentors attached to kids that fell into that at-risk category. The chance of them graduating was just plummeting because of attendance, academics, or behavior issues, severe academics, attendance, or behavior issues. And that all of a sudden, we got mentors in all 3 of those schools. We have a volunteer in the school system every single day of the school year. And no idea that's what was coming. We just knew that God gave us a vision. If there's an opportunity to invest in at-risk kids in the public school system, the church should say yes. We did. At those Vision Sundays, we talked about our role in church planting. At one in particular, we talked about our role with a brand new church plant that we helped financially support in Griffin called City Church. And we brought their lead pastor and planter, Josh Abernathy, over. And on that Vision Sunday, he and I sat and talked, and we gave them gifts, and we committed to $25,000 that our congregation was going to send to help get that church plant off the ground. That was a part of one of our Vision Sundays. We've talked about bridging the gap when we announced our partnership to be an ongoing, piece where, as they do their role in the community, we would come alongside and provide volunteers. That we would raise awareness on their behalf time after time, that when they had large needs, that we would show up. We've talked about our roles in the colleges, our roles in church plants, which now, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it just crossed 40 church plants across the country. We're getting close to having a church plant that we've been connected to in almost every state in the country. Vision Sunday is a big deal to us. I want to share with you part of what I would typically share at the beginning of next week, because we just honestly don't have enough time for me to get it all in, which is why we broke it up into two. Vision Sundays started before I even knew it was beginning. At the previous church I was there nearly 10 years, and there was a part in there where my wife and I started wrestling with the reality that we felt like we probably won't be here the next 20 years of our lives. And there was conversations that were taking place about whether or not I would be there for the next 20 or 30 years. And so eventually I came to the conclusion, and I let them know, I don't think this is what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I don't think I should be here. I don't think this is the answer. And so we started wrestling with, well, what is it then? Like, what should we take part in? Like, what? So I interviewed at some other churches. And I interviewed, and all of those went really well, and they all offered me an opportunity to jump in and be a part. But we told all of them no, because I didn't feel like that's what God wanted us to do either. And so we wrestled and we wrestled and we wrestled. And in March of 2016, we came to the conclusion that God wanted us to pursue church planting. That something established wasn't what I was hardwired for, but just something that was incredibly dirty, in the dirt, hands dirt, like just gritty, something different. And that was March 2016. We fast forward to the first Sunday of October, hence the first Sunday of October this year, the first Sunday of October 2016. And I was teaching a message that morning at our church out of Mark chapter 5, where in this particular moment in the life of Jesus, he gets in a boat and he goes to the other side of the lake, and he gets to a place called the Decapolis, which is a set of 10 Roman cities. And he goes into this place, and there's this man who's well known in the community. He's possessed by demons. And he's just kind of been a terror. They've tried to do things with him. He keeps coming back. He's so strong. They chained him up at one point. The Bible tells us. They chained him up, and he broke out of the chains. That he's naked. He screams and screeches. He terrorizes people. He takes stones and he cuts his own flesh with them just to bleed. And Jesus gets out of the boat, and this man sees Jesus, and he runs. He was living in the tombs of the city, and he runs out of the tombs, and he comes face to face with Jesus. And they're standing there, and Jesus looks at this naked, demon-possessed, shackles missing, tore up flesh man, and he looks him in the eyes, and he asks him a question. Now, this is the difference between me and Jesus, because if there was a naked man screaming, standing in my face, I would not ask him a question. I have no desire to know his answer to any of my questions. Jesus is so much better. He looks at the man and says, "What's your name?" Now, that's strange to me, because I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And so if he really wanted to, he could have not only told the man his name, he could have told him how many hairs are on his head. But it's interesting that he would ask a question he already knew the answer to. And so I told our congregation that morning, maybe the wisdom in Jesus asking this question is found in what happens after the man answers. In fact, the man doesn't answer, the demons answer. And the demons say, my name is Legion, for we are many. And Jesus, at that moment, cast the demons into a herd of pigs, and the pigs run into the water. They drown. A man's life is radically changed. And so I asked our congregation that morning, I said, maybe what we can find, the wisdom here, is there's something significant about saying out loud the evil that lives inside of us. So would you find someone this week that cares about you, that you care about, that can keep a secret, and say, hey, I've acknowledged something internally that's keeping me from being a good follower of Jesus, but I need to say it out loud to someone. Would you find one person and tell them, I don't need you to fix me, don't problem solve me, I just need you to hear me say it out loud, and then I would like for you to pray for me. So the next day I was in my backyard building a fire pit. Because it was fire pit season, it was October. And we didn't have a fire pit, at least not a real one. We had put some stones together, which typically serves just fine, but I wanted something a little, so I was building this fire pit. Long story, enormously condensed. I had a really good friend of mine that called me. I reached out. We ended up on the phone. And we had a conversation, and where he asked me, hey, I haven't heard from you. What's your one thing? And that was uncomfortable because, wasn't sure I wanted to share that. And I remember he asked me, he said, you think because you're the pastor, you don't have to do what you asked everyone else to do? And so I had a decision to make. Tell him the truth, make something up. And so I shared with him. I said, well, here's my one thing. Back in March, we came to the conclusion we should pursue church planting. But I've done absolutely nothing about it. It's October. Nothing. No next steps, no nothing. Just sat. And here's my one thing. The reason is I don't have enough faith that God will provide for my family financially. It's so easy to work in an established church, especially in the area I was in. There's a lot of money. It was easy. It was comfortable. And so I had a faith issue. And so he said, well, I know what to pray for. And he hung up the phone. So later that evening, I went to my laptop and I filled out my application on stadiachurchplanting.org to submit to the Church Planter Assessment Center. It ended up being about a 120-day process. That very next day, I walked into my lead guy's office, the church I was working at, and said, hey, I need some time today. He was like, okay, how about 2:30? And I was like, all right, 2:30, that's a long time from now. Okay, so I went in my office and I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing the whole day. And he walked in at 2:30 and I told him, I said, hey, I wanted you to know before I told anybody else. I filled out an application to the Lead Planter Assessment Center because I think this is what God wants us to do. I don't know where, I don't know when. I've got no answers. The only thing I have is an email that confirmed they received my application. That's it. That was October. Fast forward to March. Just the next year, we started working on a project here that you know today as Foundation Christian Church. We did about 10 months of community engagement, and we started weekly gatherings in January of 2018. Now, I would have thought that that was the end of our October experience and that God had taught me a lesson. But God wasn't finished teaching me lessons, very difficult ones. In fact, from that October where that decision was made and I put my application in, fast forward 1 year to the week later. We were getting ready for our first preview gathering where we were going to do a preview gathering at the high school, just one, and then we were going to do one in October, one in November, 2 in December, and then start weekly in January. And we were short money. We did not have enough money to launch. We were still in this, like, trying to raise money. Our launch team was about 40 or so people at the time, 40, 45, 50 people at the time, had grown. And there just wasn't enough funding for us to be completely mobile, right? To have a full kids ministry and a trailer and a sound system that moves in and out. We just didn't have enough money to do all those things. And so we were still in fundraising mode, trying to figure this out. We had a bunch of churches that had given generously for this to happen, like all over Chattanooga, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, here in Georgia on the south side. Well, there was a bunch of people that were involved. But we were still short. And so we had a person on our team that did some fundraisers for some really large corporations. And she was like, hey, can I throw you a fundraiser? And I was like, yes. And she was like, I do these big dinners. They're fancy, called galas. And I was like, you mean like a gala? And she was like, yeah, no, a gala. And so I just called it the Gala Gala. I don't know. I actually don't know which one's right. Probably one's right and one's Southern, but I'm not actually sure which of those things. And so it was fancy. I wore a suit. It was fantastic. It was just so great. There's pictures out there somewhere. We don't have those today. We're not going to show those. That'd be no good. But I had a suit on, like we were raising money, right? And it was fancy. We put out these invitations. We had some space donated to us to use at Fox Hall. Like we was upscale, you know what I'm talking about? We were about to get this thing. We had to raise some money. And I got a letter in the mail. Our offices at the time were on East Washington Street, just 2 blocks from here. And so I was sitting in my office, and this mail carrier person walked in with a letter. And they came and said, hey, we need your signature. And in my mind, I was like, oh, it's fundraising week. Somebody has sent me a check so big that I got to sign for it. This is the life. That's what I'm talking about. God is faithful. So I signed for that thing, and I open it up, and I pull out the thing, and I start reading it, and it is not a check. I started reading it, and it was from one of our supporting churches that heard about our fundraiser. And they said, hey, it's come to our attention that your fundraiser is being held at a place where there's a bar, and that there will be access to alcohol at this venue. And if you don't cancel the fundraiser or move it to a new location, we will pull our funding from you. That it's a very immature decision and one that was very irresponsible as we start a new church. And so the fundraiser was that weekend. And so I was caught in a hard place because we needed money. We didn't have enough already. So to go into a fundraiser and then have somebody else pull funding defeats the purpose of having the fundraiser. You know what I'm saying? But on the other hand, there's this reality that I sat with. Alcohol abuse, substance abuse runs deep in my family of origin, my biological family, as well as in my adopted family. And it's ruined a number of people's lives. It's ended my biological father's life. And alcohol is a big part of that. So I've known that. And so I personally can't drink. I'm scared to death that it might be genetic. I stay away from it, right? But I also wanted to lead a church that would have stepped in to the people in my life that were a generation ahead of me. My biological mom, my adopted dad, my biological father. I wish I led a church that when they were going through what has derailed or even for one, taken their life, that a church would have stepped in. That instead of creating some shame and have to hide an addiction because of what will people say and what will our church think, that we would find a place that's safe to go and say, hey, we've got these issues. We're having this struggle. And I wanted to lead a church like that. I wanted to lead a church that maybe had a member. We don't have membership, but had someone who would be a part of our family that might have been at the bar that night with my dad that maybe would have saw him and said, you know what, that guy probably shouldn't be driving. I don't even know him, but I know there's no doubt I should do what I need to do to get him home. And I feel like I feel like there's so many of you. I just feel like there's so many of you guys that are a part of Foundation now that I know without a doubt, if I could put you back in 1987 at that bar, that you would have made sure you got home okay. And I wanted to lead a church like that. And so I was stuck between the church I wanted to lead and the church I could afford to lead. I'm so grateful that I had a great management team, many who still serve in overseeing us as we continue to grow our church, because we're still just a baby church, that sat me down and said, hey, here's the deal. At the end of the day, we need to go with the church God has called you to lead, not the church that someone wants to pay you to lead. And so we took that opportunity to call back that church and say, thanks so much for supporting us this far. You can take the money that you were going to send to us and you're free to give it to whoever you want to. We're going to move forward with our fundraiser. 2 days later, I got a text message from another church who somehow found out about the same thing, and they also pulled their funding. In total, we raised $14,800 at that fundraiser that weekend. The fundraiser cost us in support. We lost $90,000. But it gave me an opportunity to stand in front of our launch team, which again was only about 40 or 50 people at the time, and just remind them that it doesn't matter if you write really big checks. You don't get to decide what's right and wrong. Only God does. So we finished our preview gathering later that week. 30 days later, we did our second preview gathering. 30 days after that, we did our third, and then our fourth. And January 14th, 2018, we launched weekly gatherings out of Newnan High School. Since we started weekly gatherings, we have gathered as a church in total, counting just this September that just came to a close, a total of 81 months. And we have made budget 81 out of 81 months. And every October, we take time to remember the faithfulness of God and steps of faith, because we honestly mean what we say. Jesus is in the lead. That's why we have Vision Sunday. To remind us of faithfulness, to call ourselves to faithfulness, to reset our faithfulness reminder every year. To say, what do you want from us next? And will we be faithful enough to walk forward with it? To close up, before we allow some music to do some talking, I want everyone to look at an empty seat. Like, make eye contact with it, just real quick. If it's to your left, to your right, find a seat. Make sure it's empty. And my question is, who do you want to fill it? Who do you want to fill it? Because at the end of the day, what we're not trying to do is just fill seats to fill seats. Our church doesn't exist just to add more people. Our church doesn't exist just to gather as more people than anybody else in the county on a Sunday morning. Though we're likely the largest church in the state of Georgia on the smallest piece of property in the state of Georgia. That is not why we do this either. The reason our staff, when you look at our staff as a whole, and you look at how long all of our staff members have been here, the average stay for a full-time pastoral staff member in a church in the United States is about 18 months. We've got folks that have been here since the beginning, 6, 7 years, 4 years, 5 years since they came on staff. The reason that's the way it is because our church doesn't exist just to add numbers. Our church exists for you to put people that you care about in the empty seats. Not randoms, not just who knows, whoever. The only thing that matters is the seats are full. No, the seats are empty because you have people that you just saw in your mind. And some of you had to look at the back of their head because the seat's in front of you. Some of them saw a side profile because when you look to the left or look to the right, that's how you would have seen them. But you know who should be in the seat. And it's because of them that our church is healthy. It's because of the outward focus and the constant reminder that we give to ourselves week in and week out that we don't exist for what's happening inside of this building. But it's for people that are our destination. I think we need to bring all of this back to Jesus. And honestly, we've chosen 3 songs that I think communicate everything I want to say to you so perfectly well. So I'm gonna let them do some teaching this morning. You can stand, you can sit, you can sing, you can read. For sure, I think all of us just need to bring it back to Jesus.